I will. Oh. Clapping already. I guess this was very heavy. I won't keep my journal on the stand. That probably helps lighten the load. Okay, so I guess I don't have to explain quite as much about myself because Meredith did it for me. Thank you. I first kind of got into contemplative worship and the style of contemplative Christianity, I would say like as a child. I just didn't know that that's what it was called. I could have never articulated that to someone. But for those of you that don't know me, or those of you that only know me a little bit, I'm an extreme extrovert. I'm a very loud, bubbly, big presence in most scenarios, especially when I'm in a crowd of people. I'm the kind of person, the more people there are, the more energy I have, and the bigger I become. I can expand as much as I need to fill up a space. And so I think because that is like my default, my natural state, there's always been the kind of yin to that yang within, where I'm attracted to places and spaces and people that help me to be quiet and to be still. Because when you're doing a lot of talking, when you're doing a lot of moving, you're not doing as much listening, you're not doing as much feeling, you're not doing as much contemplating. And so with every Sunday that passes, honestly, I find more and more things that they're not really revelations or epiphanies. It's more of like a sense of like returning home or to the place, space, or person that I'm supposed to be, which is both the loud and bubbly and big and bright, but also the quiet, the still, the peaceful. Does that make sense? So I've also worked for about 1,000 churches in my short life so far. And I've heard every different description of a discipleship growth pathway, levels of spiritual journey. How do we, cater to this group of people, and how do we cater to this group and everyone in between? It's the constant question of every church that they're trying to figure out, who are my people? Where are they in the spiritual journey? And how do I nourish, feed, help, grow them into whichever stage or phase of their life that they need to be in. And so I've noticed in certain churches, you have certain terms, right? And so some of you may be familiar with words like seeker or phrases like kind of now everyone calls it something different. It's usually kind of like a growing phase, or like I'm in this stage where I've accepted, I'm into the church business, and now I'm I want to learn, I want to grow, I'm figuring it out. I'm processing all of this stuff. I've decided I'm buying into this, I want to be a part of this community, but now I'm figuring it out, right? So that's kind of the secondary growing stage. And then eventually you kind of move into this leading. You may take on more leadership roles and volunteering and an active participant, maybe up here talking to a group of people if you're in this stage. And then where most churches go to next and stop is with the Great Commissioning, or once you've hit all of those milestones, the next step is that you go out into the world and then you bring people in here to start those processes. And I don't know, when I was 15 or 16 freshman, I was there's gotta be something after that. That can't just be where the growth journey ends. And I had this just huge, deep longing for something more. Something deeper, something richer. I don't even want to say that it was the next phase, because now that I've been working for churches so long, I really don't like this linear path. of like being one thing and then going to the next and then going to the next. It's really not helpful, but it's a huge piece of the world. It's this dualistic mindset that we've crafted to help ourselves make it through. I don't believe that that's the way God intended it, though, and I'll kind of get to that at the end. But what the kind of phrases or camps that I've come to really love are stages of healing, stages of training, and then stages of transformation. And so the reason that I kind of start there is because I think at any point you could go back and forth between any of those stages. And I think each one is important and meaningful. And when I'm talking about healing, I don't mean just like we fixed something that was broken or a pain that we had, right? I'm talking about wholeness and restoration and moments of insight into myself or into the God that created me, or into the people who I do life with, or into the people that I don't do life with. That's what I mean when I talk about healing. And then when I talk about training, I mean more of that learning, some of that growing stuff that I talked about initially, but more than that, it's like, how can I develop healthy rhythms of like rest and work? How can I put together like a toolbox of practices and things that are gonna protect me, help me protect others, help me bring restoration and healing to the other places and spaces in the world. And then when I'm talking about transformation, I'm talking about that stuff that it's like once you realize, once you kind of get it, once you like understand who Jesus is, your life is different. My very favorite scripture in the whole world, that's been my favorite probably since I was in junior high or high school, is Romans 12, 1 and 2, which depending on the context or the setting where I am, I will use a different translation because the Message translation is like really powerful, kind of in your face. I'm gonna read it to you here in a second. But then there's like other ones that we're more familiar with that sound more, familiar to us. And those are good too, because there's like certain key phrases that I've at different points in my life have decided that I really loved what that meant. That description matches with an image that I've created in my mind. I see synergy in these two things. So if you're not familiar with Romans 12, 1 through 2, I'm going to read it for you. This is the Message translation. It says, so here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. So it's really the beginning that I really, really love. This idea of, take your everyday, ordinary life, you're sleeping, you're eating, everything you do in between, and let that show that you get it, that you understand, who Jesus is and what God has done. And that's what I think of when I hear the word transformation. When I'm thinking about how am I supposed to be living in the world? How am I supposed to be living this transformed life? And that's really where I was at this, particular juncture in my own spiritual development as a teenager, where I was like, there's something more. What does that look like? How do I incorporate this into my eating, my sleeping, and everything in between? And I don't attend Westminster, right? So I'm not familiar. I do know Meredith a lot, right? But in all the churches that I had been in from the time that I was 15 until 30 something, I wasn't really seeing that that transformation happening in a way that was really hitting home, like the eating and the sleeping and all the things. Now, this isn't what tonight's about, but intro gastro church into my life about 2017, I was like, that gets it. That eating, sleeping, all of it is like meshed into one, like that is my jam. And y'all know how that went. But contemplative Christian spirituality has really offered a lot of answers that I was looking for, a lot of practices that I was looking for. And meditation is one of the big, like, kind of rocks or practices or tools in my toolbox that has taken a lot of development, a lot of practice, a lot of attention. In some ways, it's almost like a muscle, right? And the more you use it, the stronger it gets. And when I was thinking about how I might kind of break all that down here for you guys, I kind of divided contemplation or meditation into 3 different camps. Now, for some of you, you may be familiar with contemplative Christian spirituality. Some of you may be familiar with Richard Rohr or names like Thomas Merton or Thomas Keating. These are really kind of big teachers in the contemplative tradition. But the root word of contemplation, which is where contemplative comes from, really goes back to prayer. But not prayer in the way that we think. Did y'all already do a thing on prayer? Yes. Okay, so not that prayer, right? With the words and the saying things out loud or writing things out to God. The type of prayer, really kind of just a little backstory of contemplation and contemplative Christianity really came out of the 3rd century, when already at that time Christianity was kind of turning into this rote, robotic, this is what we do, this is how it looks, it can't be different for anybody else. And there was a group of people who were there's got to be something more, that we're starting to get away from everything Jesus was saying and doing. And so they literally went off into the desert and started trying to wrestle with and figure all this out, and came up with this new kind of word for that transformational. When Jesus went off into the desert to pray, he was doing the kind of praying that I'm going to talk about tonight, which is really meditation or contemplation, which some might say is resting in God. And so it's a very different thing. So, but to try and help kind of break it down into some nugget-sized pieces for you guys, one of my teachers and my boss, actually, at the other church, he breaks down meditation into 3 categories. And the first one he calls concentrative methods. So imagine if you've ever practiced Lectio Divina, where you read some scripture one time and you kind of take notice of what stands out to me. And then you read it again, and did the same thing stick out? Was there another word or phrase that's drawing my attention? And you do this over and over again. So it's not just reading the words, there are words here. It's you're absorbing the words almost. So that's a concentrative method, where you're looking at something, you're reading something, your brain is processing it. Hopefully your heart might be processing it too. It's sinking a little bit deeper. Or maybe you've practiced Visio Divina, which is similar to Lectio Divina, only instead of using words, does anyone want to guess what you might be using here? Visuals, pictures, yes. Things to look at. So I'm also a big tree person, in addition to being a food person and a contemplative person. And so I love resting with and sitting with trees. I think trees have a lot to teach us about the nature of God and about the restoration of the world and how the world, should, could, or would look if we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. Or interacting with a piece of art, which you're going to have an opportunity to try tonight. I'm bringing a little Visio Divina practice for you this evening. So those are concentrative methods. Does that make sense? So it's something you've got something in front of your face that you're looking at, you're thinking about, you're concentrating on. The second kind of camp that he puts things into is awareness methods. So you may have been somewhere, I don't know, Meredith may have even done this in worship, where you kind of usually people do this at like the beginning of something or maybe at the end of something to help bring your attention to where you are, to the present moment. And one of the best ways we can do that is through a body prayer or sensing our body. So a lot of times in contemplative worship at the center, we will often begin worship with someone coming up and asking everyone to recognize the pew that they're sitting in, or like to feel your back resting against the bench, to feel your feet planted on the ground. That helps drop your awareness into exactly where you are, into who you are, which developing that level of awareness is a great first step into beginning meditation or contemplation and resting with God. We're going to practice that tonight as well, doing a little sensing, a little body prayer. There are also actual body prayers where you're not saying any words, but you're going through a series of motions. They usually begin with you bowing, whether it's your whole body, maybe all the way to the floor, or maybe just your head, or as much as you're able. And then the next step would include like reaching out to God, or maybe crying out to God, whatever this kind of motion looks like or means to you. And then the next step is usually kind of coming back to your heart, again, trying to bring that awareness back into your body, into who you are, into what's going on within you. And then the next practice is usually kind of opening your arms like this to the world around you, or to the people who are near you or in your life, your family. And then focusing your hands down to ground yourself into the earth. At Gastro Church, we do a lot of talking about restoration between our relationship with God, our relationship with others, and our relationship with the earth. And we practice that by knowing where our food comes from and doing things like this. But so grounding ourselves to the earth, like creation, because what do they say? We are made from dust, and dust we shall return, That's like the next step. And then we kind of end a body prayer again with bowing. And you can do that over and over again without saying any words, without thinking of anything in particular. You're going through the motions, but not in the way that we mean going through the motions, if that makes sense. And then the last kind of category is what he calls surrender methods. And some of you who've ever done like yoga or like other kind of Eastern Zen guided meditations, a lot of times all of those practices are about emptying your mind. It's about like clearing your head of thoughts. They're trying to just get it so that there's nothing there, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. For some of us, that might be really nice for a change or for a moment. But that's not what like Christian meditation is about. Christian meditation is not about emptying your mind or yourself. It's about, I'm going to give you several different words and phrases that other people have said or called it, if I can find where I wrote that. There it is. So Richard Rohr calls it a rewiring of the mind so that everything you do is connected with the moment. Okay, so this is Christian meditation is not emptying your mind. Richard Rohr says it's a rewiring of your mind so that you're aware of how everything is connected. The earth, the people around you, God, yourself. Richard Foster, who maybe y'all have mentioned throughout this process, celebrating the disciplines, he calls it perpetual communion, which I really love. And in y'all's next worship series, y'all are going to talk about communion and what that means. And we're going to offer, this is a spoiler alert, but we're going to offer a special gastro church about what this means. And so I really love that idea, this perpetual communion. So not like just the sacrament or the symbolism of having the bread and the wine, but what it means to commune or to be connected or to be one with each other, with God. James Finley, who wrote a book that I love and would highly recommend called Christian Meditation, he calls it the process of realizing that God is wholly present in each step along the way to our divine fulfillment. And then Julian of Norwich, Norwich, if my British friend was here, would be very upset that I said Norwich, because it's Norwich. Julian calls it oneing. So like becoming one with God, with creation, with each other, with ourselves. And then my friend and boss at the other place, he calls it contempling, right? So if we take the word contemplation and we were to really break it down, kind of the root word there is temple. And for those of you who are familiar with the Jewish temple or Jewish practices, there was a whole system of entering the temple. And the ultimate goal was coming into the Holy of Holies. It was a very special place. And Michael likes to talk about how our spiritual journey is an inward and outward journey into the Holy Holies and out over and over and over again. And the kind of good news of Jesus and this new way of living is that the Holy of Holies is within you. And so with the right kind of steps and practices, just like in the temple, they had to do this first and then go to this and then do this and do this, eventually ended up in the Holy of Holies. We too can go through a series of steps and end up in the Holy of Holies, where we can commune with God, where we can become one with God, where we can connect and rest, or all of the other things that these really smart people have said. I like to think of it as like a remembering of, kind of like I teased at the very beginning, of not just who I am, but who I'm supposed to be, who God created me to be. I think there are lots of little clues and steps and, moments that help me see and realize those parts of myself, not that are new things I'm acquiring, they're maybe new things I'm discovering that are already within. So, Christian meditation has all these different categories and practices that are available to us. And I'm going to share with you just a few of the favorites, and then we're going to go try some. We're going to practice some. One of the fun things I always like telling people at the center where I am on Sunday mornings, every worship service includes 5 minutes of silence. Like complete silence. There's no one playing on the piano. There's no one ringing a sounding bell. There is nothing. It is just complete silence. And obviously, when it's your first time, that can be really uncomfortable and unnerving. But after you've done it a couple of times, there's something just really incredible about being in a room with 80 to 100 people in complete silence. And you know that everybody's focused on something. Everybody's it's like this great togetherness and also individualness at the same time. It's this big mystery, and it can be really overwhelming and really powerful in a good way. And so tonight, I'm not gonna make you sit in because some people can do centering prayer or meditation for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. We're not gonna do anything like that. I'm gonna give you just some little taste. But one of the first things that I really love that is kind of a practice that will really kind of get you ready for meditation. So imagine that you're out and about, or you're, on your way into a meeting and you've got all of your stuff ready, prepared for the meeting, but then something happens, like, papers fly in the, gust of wind or whatever, but you get befuddled and flustered. There's something called the welcoming prayer that is a great tool or resource to help you not try and get over your feelings of fluster or frustration, because those feelings are welcome, but it will help you kind of work through them to get you back to the place where you're centered and ready to do your presentation or whatever. Or maybe it's you're going into a family gathering and there's might be somebody there that you don't really want to interact with, and you're greeted by them right out the gate, right? The welcoming prayer, even if you don't have the whole thing memorized, being able to draw your awareness that you need the welcoming prayer, that's a first step of getting yourself back into that place. Because when we are centered, when we are living this transformed life, we are more compassionate, we are more aware, and we're more Christ-like. So I brought some pamphlets about the welcoming prayer, but it literally has a format for those of you that like to check boxes and do steps. But it's literally for that place where maybe you're in traffic or whatever, and you need to work through whatever your feelings are, right? Don't pull out the brochure while you're in traffic unless it's at a complete standstill, okay? One of the next things, I brought it here. I've got a series of books that I kind of start my day with. I'm not a morning person, by the way, so it's not like I get up to do all this business, okay? When I awake and I'm ready to enter the world, then I make my coffee and I go sit in my chair, and I use different psalms, more often poetry, as a way to not just physically awake myself, but awake my spirit. Those things within me that make me more empathetic and compassionate. And so using Lectio Divina, most of the time we think about doing that with scripture, but really you can do it with anything. And I do it a lot with poetry, which I would highly, highly recommend. The last kind of big thing that I brought a brochure on, and I mentioned earlier, is centering prayer. So centering prayer is another one of those things like the welcoming prayer that has a format, a formula, boxes you can check to help you get started and become familiar and help you work through the thing. There's also an incredible app that you can download. Thomas Merton, yes, he's the first one. Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk in Kentucky. And he kind of pulled back the veil in saying Christianity doesn't teach this contemplation anymore. We need to do something about that. This is the really important piece of a puzzle we're missing. And then Thomas Keating, who you may have heard of, he's the one that actually developed centering prayer along with two other people. He was another American monk. He developed this formula to help you and I all kind of enter into the process. And it usually begins by choosing a sacred word. So this is not a mantra. This is not your intention for the year or your New Year's resolution or your theme for the day or whatever. It's a word, a sacred word, something between you and God. Mine's not a secret, so I'll share mine with you, and if you'd like to borrow it, you're more than welcome, but mine is abide. It's a word we don't use very often. There's a beautiful hymn called Abide With Me. It's actually what wakes me up in the morning. That is my alarm ringtone. I I do have two others that come after that, just in case I sleep through abide with me, because it can be very gentle. But that is the word, that's the first step, is choosing your sacred word. And the sacred word is important for a lot of reasons. For me, that kind of encapsulates what I'm trying to do with centering prayer. So in a way, it is an intention, but it's also going to help me set my attention, which helps me put my energy towards what it is that I'm trying to do. But it's when those thoughts start to like come into your brain, the to-do lists and the things that the places you need to be, or the stuff you forgot to do yesterday, when those intrusive thoughts start to come into your brain, you can return to your word, right? It's like once you realize that that's happening, just come back to your word. So that's the first step. The second step is obviously about finding a comfortable position, because usually people that are practicing centering prayer are going to be sitting for a while. And so you don't want to do things like, sit Indian style, because that cuts off blood flow and, your legs might fall asleep, and that's going to distract you from what you're doing. That'll bring you out of the Holy of Holies. You want to sit somewhere where you're going to be comfortable, preferably wearing something that you're comfortable in. Nothing's cutting off circulation to, anything else. And then kind of get yourself situated. You don't want to have anything in your hands or anything that's going to kind of distract you. And then the third kind of step is to start with your word, your sacred word. And again, this is not a practice, again, about trying to empty your mind, right? Although we don't want to be focusing our attention on our to-do list and the things that we forgot or need to be doing or whatever. We want to just come back to our word. And if once you come back to your word, if you feel like you're centered and you're in a place where you can rest, then you can let go of your word. Sometimes I've heard it described as like imagining, if you can do this step, like you give yourself a pat on the back or thumbs up, right? But if you can imagine that like you're sitting on a riverbank and like, there's a stream of current coming by with boats on it. And each boat is a different thought or a to-do list or whatever. And they're all different sizes, whatever. If you're just letting them go by, you can give yourself a pat on the back. That's the first step. Eventually, you want to get to a place where there's no boats on your river, okay? But the sacred word might help you return to the riverbank, because you don't want to jump on the boat, you don't want to be going down the current, that sort of thing. And then fourth step is a lot of times, like especially if you use the Centering Prayer app, there will be like a chiming of a bell that'll help kind of say, okay, your time is done. In the app, you can set, I want to try and do this for 7 minutes. I want to try and do this for 20 minutes, whatever. And so that way you don't have to look at a clock. You don't have to worry about a timer. In fact, it's better if you don't set a timer, because what your, what's it called? Like your tendency will be to check the timer and see where you are in this process. But once the chime happens, is to take just another minute. See if you can go just a step further and rest where you are. So I know that sounds like so simple, but it is. And the more that you do it, the better, the easier, the more meaningful it can become. When I first started, I was like, abide, 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 abide. I've also found that doing centering prayer in my condo is really, really difficult. And for those of you who live on Bering, which I know most of you do, it is incredibly difficult right now. But finding a good space, maybe it might be outside though, where you can, be in nature, whatever. Finding a good space before you get started can be really, really helpful. Another tip that I kind of like to give to people when they're trying centering prayer is not to change your word. Because what can happen, like just while you're thinking is like, oh, maybe I don't like that word. What does that word even really mean? Like, I need a word that better explains or describes how I'm feeling or what I'm wanting to accomplish in my time with God. Like, that's not what this time is for. You can do that later. You can set aside some time to pick out your sacred word, but not while you're practicing centering prayer. So, with that in mind, I'm going, Casey, if you'll pass out, we're gonna start trying some of these things. And before we try them, I know Meredith wants there to be like a Q&A at the end, but if anybody wanted to ask a question right now, I'd be happy to try and answer it if you have one. No? Okay. What Casey's passing out right now is some artwork from the Stations of the Cross. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Stations of the Cross, that is essentially a depiction of the Via Dolorosa, or all of the steps that Jesus took in his last days or in his last hours before dying. If you go to the Holy Land, you can literally walk the Via Dolorosa and stop at the Stations of the Cross. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of things going on there. It's not as, when I went, I thought it was going to be very contemplative, peaceful experience, and it was not at all. Fun fact, I was also there the week the world went berserk in 2020. That's when I was in the Holy Land. So there's an artist I love, his name's Scott Erickson, and he did his own depiction of the Stations of the Cross. And so each of you have a different station. And so I'm going to invite you for the next couple of minutes, not to focus on the words that are at the bottom, but to examine the picture, right? So in using the Lectio Divina format, you may go back to the picture about 4 times. So upon first gaze, what stands out to you? And then think about that. What does that mean? Why did that stand out to you? Whatever questions come up. And then on second glance, is there something else that draws your attention, right? You get the idea. So do that about 4 times. If you want to write some things down, you're welcome. I'm going to give you just like a minute to do this practice. Okay, everybody had about a minute. Does anybody want to share, like either what image they have or something that came up for them? You absolutely do not have to. I just want to give people a chance. If you do, there was something that really caught your attention that maybe you have a question about or you would just like other people to know. Has anyone ever seen these images before? Yeah. Has anyone seen other images of the Stations of the Cross before? Yeah, so what do you think, how they compare? Are they interesting? Are they weird? Do they make you uncomfortable?
How was the saw?
Question
about that.
Yeah, the saw, like what that represents. For those of you that can see other people's images, you might notice that every image takes some form of the cross. Yeah. So traditional, like in old art, like if you were to look at like really old paintings and more traditional depictions of the Stations of the Cross, you always see Jesus and you always see a cross, almost always. And so this is Scott's like interpretation of that. So I'm going to let you take your image if you like, although some of the things we're going to do, we're going to move into the sanctuary. Ooh, field trip. You can take that with you for a couple of reasons. One, in case the practices that we try in the sanctuary are just not working. They're not connecting. You're not ready for it. But maybe the Visio Divina was hitting home, was doing something. I want you to have that with you to help guide you through this time. So take your image if you like. And I would like for everyone to spread out. One of the things that I really love about where we worship on Sunday mornings is that we have a big space too, and everybody gets their little their little corner, their little piece. So feel free to find a space. You know, most of the time churches, they like everybody sit up as close to the front as possible, which of course nobody does. But here, I want you to have permission to sit wherever you want, in the dark, in the light, whatever feels right. So for those of you that aren't familiar with a sound bowl, I have got one up here. It's this large, big bowl. And I have a special pillow and a special mallet that I'm gonna hit the sound bowl with. And that's gonna mark the beginning of each cycle of time. And then I'll ring the bell again to signify the end of a series of time, okay? So the first thing that we're gonna try is gonna involve like nothing in your hands. You don't have to come up with your sacred word yet. All you have to do is listen to the sound of my voice. You can close your eyes if you want to. It might be helpful. But I want you to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. I want you to sense the bottoms of your feet on the floor, to take note of how your back feels against the pew, the hard wood, and then the cushion that you're sitting on. Take another breath in, and then another breath out. It might be helpful to take your hands and place them on the tops of your thighs, either with your palms facing up in a receptive posture, or down in a way that reminds you that you're connected to your body. You might find it helpful to take your fingertips and touch the cloth of the cushion that you're sitting on, to remind yourself that you're in a beautiful, sacred space, a place where maybe you've worshiped before. Take another breath in and out. Find a rhythm of breathing that's comfortable for you, that feels natural and restorative, not labored. And then I want you to focus your attention on the area of your heart. It might help to take one of your palms or both of your hands and place it on your heart. And then I want you to imagine that your heart is like the sun. Bright, warm, and that it's filling your body all the way down to your toes, to every finger, to the top of your head. And then when you feel full of sunshine and warmth, I want you to let that sunshine seep out of you to the person next to you, to the people that are behind you, to the people that are in front of you. I want you to imagine that you're filling up this entire room with that sunlight that's coming, that's radiating from the area of your heart. Now that this room is full of sunshine and warmth, I want you to imagine that the bottoms of your feet are in a pool of water. Just a little pool of water. Maybe it's a puddle. Maybe it's the beginning of a spring. I want you to think about what it feels like to have your toes dipping in these cool, gentle waters. And then I want you to imagine that the water is moving. The pond, the puddle is getting a little bit bigger. And now the folks around you are in the water with you. You look around and you've all are ankle deep in this cool pond, river. Maybe while your eyes are closed, you see other people there with you who aren't in this room. Then I want you to imagine that the water has gone even further. And now it's more like an ocean or a lake. And there's your neighborhood, your family that's somewhere else, that this water has just become so big that everyone you can think of that you know is standing in the water with you. And then I want you to imagine the same water, the water that you started that just had your 10 toes, now is encompassing the entire world. That we're all in the water together. And we might be able to hear the waves crashing against the shore or the cliffs, the things around us, maybe against our ankles. Now I want you to choose a sacred word. It can be whatever word first comes to mind. It can be the last word you heard. It could be a word from a song or something that has great meaning to you. And once you've got your word, I want you to hold on to it. I'm going to ring the bell, and then we're going to enter into a time of centering prayer, where it's just you and God and maybe your sacred word. Would anyone like to share their feeling of that? You don't have to share anything that you might have thought about or how well you did, but maybe you'd just like to share how you feel right now. Was there anything that you liked about having the time of quiet, or me walking you through kind of a guided meditation? Yeah, when you carve out that space to be still and to be quiet, there might be something God's been trying to tell you or show you, that while you've been so busy doing all the things, you might have missed. Thank you. So that kind of practice there right at the beginning, we call that heart-focused breathing. And there's actually been a lot of science. There's like an institute that studies, it's called Heart Math. And like the Navy uses it, and medical professionals use it as a way of managing and learning about your heart rate and heart coherence, right? So some of you might be familiar with when you get angry, you might be able to feel your heart start beating a lot faster. That's that adrenaline kicking in. And practicing heart-focused breathing is a technique that can help you bring you back to yourself, right? It can help you connect with your heart. And when we live out of our heart instead of our head or our gut, that's some of that transformation that I was talking about earlier, where we're more aware and more compassionate, more Christ-like. So there's definitely something to that, I think. Anything else anybody would like to share, or a question you'd like to ask? I brought a ton of books. You saw me unloading my suitcase, that middle table. Some of the books are things I like to use to help me become more aware, to become more compassionate in the moment. I've got 3 different books out there called Every Moment Holy that are a collection of liturgies that will literally, like, here's a liturgy for your morning coffee. Here's a liturgy for changing a diaper. Here's a way that you can make every moment a holy one. It deals with grief, it deals with monotony, it deals with all kinds of things. I've got some of my favorite poems and the things I use in the morning. I also, if you're interested in learning more about centering prayer or contemplative Christianity, I brought some books on that. You're welcome to take pictures of anything. In a few weeks, my team at the Center for Christian Spirituality, we're going to bring a contemplative worship experience here to Westminster in this sanctuary. That is another spoiler alert for you guys. That announcement will be coming out next week. But if that's something that you might be interested in, it's going to be a lot more of this. But over the course of an hour in here in a space and quiet and candlelight and things like that. That'll be the first Sunday in May. And then I didn't mention this earlier, but the labyrinth, walking a labyrinth, is another form of meditation. And there's some labyrinths all over the city. And so for those of you who maybe the sitting still is not the entry point for you, maybe you need to start with some mindful, meditative walking. Labyrinths are a great tool because they symbolize that inward-outward journey into the Holy of Holies and out. You know, labyrinths have a lot of turns and twists, but there's only one way in, there's only one way out. You can't get lost. So it's a great tool for physically praying and contemplating and meditating. And there's some all over the city. You can Google But the center, we also just installed one last fall, and it's really special, and it's open at any time. It's in the backyard at the Anchor House, and I brought some flyers for that too, so you could go there and walk it anytime you want. I'm also gonna exit and stand out there, so if you wanna ask me some questions, not in front of everybody, or you want some specific recommendations or apps, then you can come and I'm happy to give them to you. If you also wanna linger a little longer, you're welcome. In our worship service, we end with an inner benediction. So instead of a pastor coming out here and blessing you and sending you forth with a good word, we like to invite folks to sit and hear what good word God has for you individually. And then once you feel like you have that, to depart when you're ready. So I want to make that invitation to you as well. If you want to sit and just linger for a few moments longer until you feel like you have that good word, you're more than welcome. So, but thank you for your presence here and helping me co-create this space where we can all find a little more quiet and peace and connect to each other and to God and to the world. So thank you.